Stop messing around, stop fooling around, stop delaying, stop procrastinating. Get up, get out, get it done. Everything is possible, nothing is a problem, and anything can be overcome. I just get my ass up out of bed, I get my shit together, and I get out and I start the fight. And that will transform you from a mere mortal into a superhuman being. I've never, ever, ever met anybody who told me that they got rich watching their IRA or their 401k.
Welcome back to the Daily Cash Flow. How you doing, Peter? Happy Wednesday.
George, nice to see you. Glad to be here with everybody. Let's just jump into it. A lot going on this week.
A lot going on, absolutely. Yeah. So I wanted to start off, there's this guy, Seth Godin, that I follow, and I get his newsletter every day. And this blog caught my eye, and it talks about some of the stuff that we talk about here. And so usually I give you a quote to react to. This is a whole blog, but it's a short blog. So I just wanted to read some of it and then see what you think. So he says, unwritten rules get written when someone decides to selfishly push. There's an assumption of civility and fairness in all of our interactions. When a harsh competitor unilaterally breaks unwritten rules because it's not technically against the rules, the community then writes down a new rule. The best way for a market to be a free market, this is why I brought it up, is for the participants to exercise self-restraint. The second best way is for clear and useful rules to be stated and enforced. What doesn't work are unwritten rules that are often broken by selfish bullies. So I thought this was kind of interesting observation about market behaviors. I was wondering, do you agree, disagree, somewhere in between? What do you think about this?
There's a lot to unpack here. When it comes to market behaviors, George, you know this about me, the freest markets work the best and are the most beneficial for the consumers. So if we're talking about a selfish bully coming into the competitive marketplace and gaining more market share because of that person being a more aggressive player in the market, to me, that sounds like free market competition, and this person just outcompeted. That's what comes to mind. If you come into the marketplace and you beat me, then you beat me, and I have to go back to the drawing board and get better, bigger, stronger, faster. What I sense in what you read is that perhaps the loser goes back to the drawing board and complains and gets petitions and lobbies the leaders to tighten legislative policy and regulations. I don't want that. But that is the evolution of a lot of markets for a lot of different product and service types. But look, the freest markets are the best.
Yeah, I think this could be a dead end and we can edit it out if it is. But I think what comes to mind is like 2008 is that technically all the things that were happening within 2008 were legal. They were within the rules, you know, the spoken rules. But then, you know, obviously things went awry and then sort of new regulations and policies were
You're talking about banking?
Yeah.
Lending and banking? Yeah. You say, holy crap, how did that happen? How did our housing market collapse? Oh, we issued loans to strippers and mariachi singers. We've talked about those two examples. Look, I love any career and industry, but, you know, there's undocumented income and off the books income, and it's lumpy income, and you can't really count on it like regular W-2 full-time employment income. So some of these jobs shouldn't have gotten underwritten as stable, reliable income back in 08 and 06 and 07. And those mortgages shouldn't have been issued. So they go, oh, why did the housing market collapse? And when they ask these questions, they look and they see that there's certain subsegments of the market that maybe wouldn't normally qualify for loans, but qualified. So they changed the rules. That's fine. I mean, I think they had to do that. Because if I'm a bank, I don't want to be putting money out with people who are unqualified to repay it and service the loan. So if the restrictions tightened after 08 because of things like that, and there was many things in 08 that were going on, but we're just talking about, in this one example, the housing collapse. You know, if they want to tighten the restrictions, you know, that's fine. They're tightening it for everybody. And now everybody competes under the same guidelines. Again, may the best competitor win, no matter what the guidelines are, no matter what the rules are. I want to compete. I want to win. And I want us to go at it toe to toe. And if you outdo me in the marketplace, shame on me, and I have to go back to the drawing board, and I got to get better, bigger, stronger, faster.
Yeah, I think that's what intrigues me about this conversation is that I think it's tempting when we talk about the free market to be, you know, we say like, oh, well, just we need everything to be free, but again, tightening the rules was seemingly necessary in that moment. And so it's walking that line of, well, what actually is completely free and what is properly regulated. And I guess,
well, as free as possible, given the circumstances and the legislative environment at the time. Look, in 2008, they went back and said, crap, how did the housing market collapse? How did the insurance markets collapse? How did the banking markets collapse? They looked at all of it and they tightened the screws down. They put a comprehensive set of new regulations in place to address all of that. Then it loosened up a little bit later on in 2016 when Trump became president. A lot of that got rolled back. Now they're tightening it up again. I mean, this is the normal flux and ebb and flow of markets, right? You have to use the data that's in front of you at the time to implement rules and laws and regs that address the stuff that's happening. You know, to me, it doesn't matter what the rules and regulations are. There's always going to be rules and regulations. I like fewer, but that's just me. And whatever they are, I'm going to compete within the boundaries of those rules and regs. I don't want to operate with some sort of forced sensitivity or caring about my competitor, and therefore I won't be as aggressive because I don't know. I don't know what that was all about, but that's not me.
I mean, certainly, you know, we're talking about winners and people who are highly competitive in the market. Amazon always comes up in that conversation. It's something we've talked about a lot before. Recently, they started paying people, or they're proposing this, paying customers $10 to pick up their purchase rather than having it shipped to their home. And I've seen a lot of people take this as a sign of the Financial Times, that it's stress on large corporations as much as small corporations. And I was wondering, what do you read into this kind of move from Amazon?
We've been talking about Amazon and delivery and package logistics for about 6 years now, starting back from when they purchased Whole Foods. And we thought that the next acquisition, when I say we, I mean the markets and the media at large, felt like the next acquisition target was likely FedEx, because then Amazon would be able to have greater control over their distribution network. And they buy the FedEx, and all of a sudden they've got trucks and drivers and routes, and they could get their packages. Look, the package logistics industry is really complicated. Right now, it's suffering from the same labor challenges that everyone else is suffering from. And it's just complicated. You trucks break, there's fleets, you need maintenance. It's super expensive. There's fuel issues, there's driver training issues, there's qualifications issues, there's liability issues. Amazon's saying, screw it. We'll just pay our customers $10 for them to bring it to us. It's way cheaper than for us buying trucks and paying drivers and paying third-party companies to go deliver our logistics and package management ourselves. So it's not difficult for me to see how Amazon can come to the conclusion like, yeah, it's probably good to just try and incentivize the customers to go do it, and we'll give them a discount. Not unlike we were talking about IKEA paying their customers to drive to them, depending on how far they were away. They'd get increased credits and benefits by coming to the store. Companies are thinking of ways to cut costs, to drive traffic. They're being creative. They're thinking outside the box. The markets that we're operating in now are new. We've never before seen a lot of the dynamics that are occurring now. You have to be agile. You have to try new stuff. And so I wouldn't want to be the owner of thousands and thousands of trucks that I have to maintain, and thousands of drivers calling in sick and not showing up to work, and I can't get the packages out, and then I've got returns, and I've got a credit custom. I mean, it all sounds like a massive logistical nightmare. So in the meantime, while Amazon's trying to figure it out, Amazon's going to incentivize their customers to come pick up their own packages. $10 seems like a good deal for Amazon. Seems like maybe a good deal for the customer. I don't know, if you've got 5 or 6 packages to pick up and you get 50 or $60 out of it, worth thinking about. Look, you got to try anything and everything. I applaud Amazon for giving this particular idea a shot, just like I really supported and applaud IKEA for giving the driving credits program a shot. George, it's 2023, man. It's post-pandemic. The world is imploding every day with all sorts of new things coming up between the financial situation, the labor situation, the educational situation, the political situation, the socioeconomic situation. My God, I could go on and on and on. So anything where these companies can try and find ways to cut some costs while still delivering good value, I think it's a relevant thing to explore.
Are you doing anything differently within your own businesses to optimize efficiencies or cut costs in the
always
face of this?
Any good manager in business is always looking at your revenue and expenses and looking for ways to make things more efficient, to cut costs, always. And this is part of the struggle that's going on for a long, long time, not just recently with the labor markets, because there's always layoffs and there's always downsizing and there's always pressures on the labor force and there's always demands on the labor force. Let me tell you something. The labor force will often respond, well, what about job security? What about my career? There is no job security. George, we talked about this a billion times. You have to make your own job security. So whether it's the labor market from 6 or 7 years ago, or to the labor market today with all of its new dynamics and challenges and features, you guys got to figure it out. I mean, we haven't even gotten into a real discussion about AI and the impact on the labor markets with AI, and I hope too soon. George, I got an email from a friend of mine in Texas the other day who's outsourcing all of his office staff labor to the Philippines, where the cost of labor is much less. They're very well trained. They speak lovely English, and they're able to latch on to your key functions and requirements and deliver at like a tenth of the price, right? So he's choosing to cut his costs by outsourcing certain functions overseas. This is not a questionable move. This is something that any leader and any manager is going to have to look at. I haven't yet done the analysis of outsourcing certain functions to overseas third-party labor. It's not really me. I like to have teams and everybody be there together. I recognize that certain functions could probably happen that way. So for me, I haven't done that yet. But I'm certainly aware that it's happening, and I'd love to save money, and I'd love to deliver my products and services to the marketplace at a lower cost. So, I mean, that's something that's always imposed on me. Anybody who's in business has to worry about that kind of stuff. Yes, I'm always looking at ways to cut costs and be more efficient. If I weren't, I shouldn't be in the job that I'm in. And for those of you that own businesses out there or lead teams, you always have to be looking at your cost structures and your efficiencies, and you always have to be challenging things.
Airbnb is challenging things a little bit more, in their industry right now. They proposed this friendly apartments project. Have you heard about this?
I've heard.
Yeah, so they're partnering with certain apartment buildings in the U.S. to allow tenants to sublet to short-term renters. Is this a game changer? Is this a novelty? Is this something else entirely?
They tout it as a game changer. George, right, I don't get it, but they have hundreds of buildings that have already signed up to permit this. I don't get it. If I get a revenue cut from it, maybe you could sell me on it, but I have no interest in letting other people control my real estate and the revenue that it could potentially generate. If Airbnb is going to tell me, hey, Peter, you should really sign up your buildings and allow your tenants to do short-term rentals once they sign a long-term lease with you, why don't I just not get a long-term tenant, and why don't I just do short-term rentals in my own real estate that I own and control? I don't know why I need to do a long-term lease with a tenant for my apartment, and then that tenant has rights to then sublease out an Airbnb in short-term, a bedroom or the whole apartment or whatever the case may be, for their benefit, not for mine. I'm so strict about who I let into my properties. I'm so strict about my underwriting and my application process. And I really want to know all of the key metrics, all of the information about the people that are applying to reside in my real estate. It's all a matter of control and permissions and qualifications, and I'm not going to give that up. I mean, it sounds crazy to me. So I don't know who these hundreds of property owners are that are signing up for this for Airbnb, but I'd love to know more about it because maybe I don't know the full story, but I would never do it. I mean, you'd have to pay me. You'd have to assure me certain things. There's liability issues. The new person coming in isn't subject to my lease. They're subject to the sublease that the tenant offers them. I haven't seen that document. Maybe they're going to sublease to a meth lab. Maybe they're going to sublease to a rock and roll band who's going to practice from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. Like, I don't know. Like, why would I do that? Not for me. I wish Airbnb luck. Airbnb is also, interestingly, blamed by many for being part of the problem why the cost of housing and rents are so high, because every time someone takes a unit of housing and puts it into the short-term market for Airbnb, for example, they're removing it from the long-term market, only pushing up long-term housing prices. It's a really controversial topic. George, I think a lot lately of the cost of housing, the price of housing, how expensive it's gotten. Things like Airbnb contribute, but it's supply and demand. Airbnb sucks out supply. So while Airbnb is sucking out supply, you've got property owners now that are signing up to participate in this. And I don't know, maybe it's going to push their rents up higher. I don't know. I don't get it.
Yeah. The only thing that I can think of is maybe if in a market where, vacancies are, more rampant, then maybe this is kind of like a novel thing that they can offer as an incentive. But
right. Maybe they'll sign more leases because the tenant in the marketplace will go, oh, well, if I get in a bind, I'll be able to sublet my apartment. Right. So let me sign a lease here.
Yeah, but like you said, the headaches of the lease situation seem like a nightmare waiting to happen, because we've already talked about, I think, our last episode, we talked about the Airbnb fiasco with people, wasting money and things like that. Yeah. And then Airbnb has pretty much no protection for landowners, so it's rough.
George, when you're a housing provider, the keys are the strength of your lease contracts, your agreements, because that's what generates your revenue, and control over your real estate. You don't want to relinquish control, and you don't want to have weak agreements and contracts. To me, this is both of those, and I would avoid it like the plague. So someone prove me wrong. Someone drop comments below and tell me why I'm wrong to not support a property owner of a multifamily property allowing short-term rentals and Airbnb to go on in a situation where you've signed a long-term lease with a primary tenant. Like, I don't get it. Why would you want to do that?
Yeah. Let us know in the comments, people. I want to hear about it. We've talked about McDonald's quite a bit on this show.
The red box comes in, you pull out the red bag, you put it in the red microwave, you hit the red button, and then it goes on the red conveyor belt. And when it gets to the cash register, they push the red button. I mean, it's great. There's the first real education I got about systems.
It was one of our first videos that we did, I remember.
Yeah, I love that.
So now that system is kind of getting even maybe more efficient with these robot McDonald's. It's Vegas, Fort Worth, Denver. They have these experiments where it's completely run by automation and AI.
Completely run? My understanding was that it's just the front of the house and that the back of the house is still humans.
So I think some of them have this. There's this robot called Flippy that does flip burgers. So I don't know if that also does fries and like all the other things, but I do know the burger situation is being run, I think, by robots as well. It does seem like there's a lot of bugs to work out. TikTok there's a lot of people going and...
We're in the early innings of this.
Yeah.
For sure.
But do you foresee using like robots in your own industry anytime soon? Do you think business owners
I don't know
should be
anytime
now?
soon.
Is it too early? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know anytime soon or when, but yes, right. I foresee it because this is definitely happening. The train is on the tracks. Not just for McDonald's, not just for my industries and businesses, but for everybody everywhere. This is happening. There's going to be a shift in workforce. There's going to be jobs that are lost. There's going to be jobs that are now gained because every time something happens in the economy, which is new, there's new economies that occur. There's going to be a shift of labor force. There's going to be a shift of skill set. Front of house people at McDonald's are no longer going to be needed. They're going to have to go seek work elsewhere. I was in a conversation yesterday with a very smart guy who said he was really concerned about his mom. His mom has a blue-collar job. She works in a kitchen corporation situation. She's in the kitchen providing kitchen services, and they're replacing half the kitchen staff with robots and AI. The question to the group was, what about job security? Is it right? Is it fair? Listen, there is no such thing as job security. You have to create your own job security. I'm not going to repeat myself again. But in this case, look, it's a horrible thing when you feel personally like your job's coming to an end and you don't want it to, but there's going to be new opportunities and this person should seek out those new they're going to have to seek out the new opportunities. This is what happens. I mean, I'm trying to pivot, adapt, and change every day of my life so that I don't get crushed in the competitive marketplace, so I don't get left behind as all these changes come speeding down the pipe in my face. I'm trying to change and adapt so I can survive. Everyone's going to have to do that. That's the name of the game. AI, robots, McDonald's, whatever the deal is, you're going to have to figure out how and where you fit in this landscape where all of this technology is happening and it's threatening jobs. You're going to have to figure out where you fit in. And if you see that you don't fit in anywhere, or if you're not comfortable where you're fitting in, you're going to have to make a change.
Yeah, it makes me think of something you've said before about the it's not over until either you achieve the goal or until you say it's over. And it's a slightly different situation, but
it's not over until you win or you quit.
Yeah, and so in this situation where there's, forced opportunity, you kind of either have to decide, okay, am I going to, sit and say, well, I lost, this former opportunity, or, create your own. Yeah. And, it's a difficult situation, but that's, the reality of it. Yeah. This is kind of a two-part question that Warren Buffett had his annual shareholders meeting with Berkshire Hathaway.
It's always such a big headline grabber when that happens.
Yeah, I know. Woodstock for capitalists. I mean, that's a catchy line. So he was talking about a lot of the same things we've been talking about. I mean, bank crisis, de-dollarization.
Wait, you're telling me that Warren Buffett is listening to our show and talking about the same things we're talking about?
He must be an avid listener. I think he's listening to Daily Cash Flow every week. And, well, actually, it is interesting, though, that obviously de-dollarization and bank crisis, everyone's talking about. But the one that caught my eye and ear was he did say, he didn't use the phrase, live the eulogy you want for yourself, but it was really close. I forget what the quote was, but he basically said that same thing. And so first off, we can talk about any of that and, kind of your take on Warren Buffett. But what I really wanted to talk about was a lot of people take his word as gospel. And it got me thinking about self-awareness and knowing your own personal goals, because it made me wonder, there's a lot of people who admire Warren Buffett, but they don't necessarily want his life, his exact life, because it's not the same goals that they have in their own lives. Yeah. So
they want his bank account, not his life.
Exactly. And so I was wondering, do you remember disagreeing with a more experienced investor or someone who, is a champion in your industry, and it was a right decision, that it was a good decision?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time over the past 35 years, George. I can't even count. I love this question because no one's ever asked me that. I can think of, just in the first 3 seconds listening to you ask me that, I can think of a half a dozen situations where someone was more experienced, more seasoned, older, wiser, more successful than me. They disagreed and I was right. Look, and I can also think of a lot of situations where I was wrong, too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm always right. But your question is about whether there was a bigger bear and I ended up being the correct one between the two bears. Yeah, it's happened. I remember when I was buying properties up in the Bronx and parts of northern Manhattan and Harlem and in parts of Brooklyn that at the time it just weren't popular purchases, but I was there doing it because that's what I could afford and that's where the pricing drew me to. And people looked at me and said, what are you doing that for? I mean, real experienced, heavy-hitting real estate in New York City real estate insiders, people that I aspired to be. I mean, these guys were billionaires. They looked at me and said, what are you doing? You're crazy. It's all I could do. It's all I could afford. And the business plan for it, I saw very clearly, let's improve these neighborhoods. Let's improve the buildings. Let's provide a higher quality housing product. And I did that, and it was very successful. And then, a year, 5 years, 10 years later, they said, wow, Peter, remember that meeting we had 5-10 years ago? Well, you really did it. So there was that example, being up in the various different neighborhoods and boroughs around Manhattan. I had a very similar situation happen when I went to some of my New Jersey markets. I had a very similar situation happen when I opened up a chain of restaurants when I was a kid and my first business out of graduate school. When you do something new, people always will look at you, whether they're successful or not, older, wiser or not. They'll always look at you and say, you can't do that. You don't want to do that. Why would you do that? It's your job to then say, well, here's why I'm going to do that. And I'm going to go do it. And I'll talk to you in 6 or 12 or 24 months. And then let's see who is right. Anybody who's an entrepreneur, anybody who's in business is going to have to face those doubters. I'm not going to say haters because in my example, these people weren't haters. They were people who were close to me and in my orbit, but they just didn't see what I saw for whatever reason. And there's always going to be those situations and those discussions that you're going to have when people challenge you to say, why do you really want to do that? And have you thought that through? And how are you going to pay for it? And is that the best location, right? All of those things and more. There's always going to be those discussions. You have to be prepared to answer them. Look someone in the eye and have a real meaningful discussion with them. And you have to be able to go to bed at night knowing that you really believe what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think it's such a crucial distinction to understand, okay, this is my path, this is the thing that I want, and pursue it wholly in that sense. Because I think, yeah, it's really easy, especially now with social media, to look at someone who is more successful and say, oh, well, I just need to do exactly what they're doing. And to some extent, that's true. You can learn a lot that way, and that's really valuable. But sometimes you end up living someone else's life instead of your own.
People that forge new paths have to be prepared to get the heat. You know, there's no easy path. If you're forging a new one, that's the hardest of all paths. And if you're going to do that, you have to be prepared for the heat. The heat's going to come in terms of no customers there from day one. It may come in terms of no support from towns, municipalities, or legislature. It may come from haters and doubters and naysayers. That's a big one. That's a big one. You know, it may come from not finding what you need from vendors and suppliers and talking the likely vendors and suppliers into changing their course to meet your needs. Like, if you're forging a new path, all that stuff and more is going to happen. If you can't deal with it, and, you know, get out. Get out. But yeah, I've experienced that so many times. I mean, more times than I care. I'm trying to think of even more examples. When I went to some of my New Jersey markets, people said to me, why do you want to do that? At the time, New Jersey wasn't as heavily regulated as New York. I was feeling pressure from a highly regulated New York City environment, and I needed to diversify out and build and expand in a place that was more receptive and open to having higher quality of housing stock on existing buildings, not new construction. And so I saw that opportunity in New Jersey. I saw it in Florida. I saw it in my markets in Texas. I'm forging new paths all the time, George. We're coming to market with a new product right now, a new building type, a unique, flexible office, commercial, retail, warehouse property. It's all of that in one. It's not residential, but it's everything else all in one. It looks great. It's designed well, and it caters to a lot of the activity that's happening in our economy right now with small businesses and distribution and warehousing and FBA and all that kind of stuff. And it's a new path, and the banks had a hard time listening to it at first, and investors had a hard time hearing about it at first, and contractors didn't know how to price it and bid it at first. But, you know, you have to keep pounding it into them, and then because I believe and because I'm cheering it and I'm applauding it and I'm driving the ship, I can leverage relationships and I can build upon these things, and I can hopefully get people to see it my way and give me a shot, which I did. And now we're coming out of the ground. Next week, we have our first groundbreaking on this. And I'll talk more about this stuff as we get past the groundbreaking, but it's exciting stuff. I think the market needs this particular product. No one else was delivering it, but, you know, I'm prepared for the heat. Like, I'm prepared for the heat. People say, I don't think it's going to work. And I'm like, I think it's going to work. You know, bank will say, we don't want to lend. We don't think it's going to work. We don't believe in it. I'm like, well, I believe in it. I'll just go find a different bank, you know, or I'll fund it a different way. But I know that this product, there's a lot of demand for it. So that's what I see. So I'm forging forward for all the other business owners and entrepreneurs out there. You got to be ready for people to doubt you. You got to be ready for people to think, yeah, your investment ideas aren't so great. You know, if you listen to everybody, you'll never get anywhere. You have to make your own mind up, and you have to take your own action.
Yeah. That's exciting. I'm excited to hear about that. You just mentioned the leveraging relationships, and
I love that word, by the way.
Yeah, so like I wanted to ask you about that because you've spoken and written quite a bit about leverage. We've spoken about it a lot on this podcast. In something you wrote recently, you observed that the word leverage can have a bunch of different connotations.
Multiple meanings depending on who's using it.
Right.
Yeah.
So why do you think that is? What do we need to understand about leverage if you want to be successful?
People who aren't successful use the word leverage like it's a liability, like it's a bad thing, negative connotation. Right? I don't want to take on too much leverage. I don't want to get leveraged up to my chin. I don't want, right? They talk about it like debt, like too much obligation, too much financial pressure. People who are successful talk about leverage as something that is an asset. That's a benefit. Oh, I leverage relationships. Oh, I got leverage from the bank. Oh, I leveraged up and I'm able to expand, right? This is how successful people use the word leverage, and unsuccessful people will use every other negative version of the word leverage to suit their particular narrative. And it's really interesting to see how the same word can have so many different meanings and definitions depending on where you are in the business spectrum, depending on where you are on the income or net worth spectrum, depending on what you're trying to achieve in your career or with your business, right? People who are out there duking it out and doing real business recognize that leverage is an asset, not a liability. And people who are out there trying to figure stuff out, or they haven't yet, or they're still trying, a lot of them are like, oh, I don't want to take on the leverage. I mean, I'm trying to deploy leverage every day in my life. I want to leverage relationships with people. I want to leverage capital. I want to leverage technologies. Leverage can mean use. Leverage can mean deploy. Leverage can mean take advantage of. Leverage can mean benefit from. Leverage doesn't have to mean being buried. Leverage doesn't have to mean being burdened. It all depends, George, like everything else in life, on how you look at it and what you're trying to accomplish. But it's a really interesting word, and it's so important in business, in economics, in being an entrepreneur, in growing and expanding. This word comes up all the time. How are you going to interpret that word, and how are you going to use that word to your benefit? Are you going to use it as an excuse to not take action, or are you going to use it as a motivator to take certain actions that are going to help you in your business? I find it so fascinating.
Yeah, well, and I think it ties in directly to something we've talked a lot about before, is responsibility. That I think the way that you just talked about leverage now, I feel like all of the reasons that people are potentially afraid of it is because it demands responsibility in almost every situation. So even if it's not a economic situation, let's say it's a relationship that you're leveraging, you're still responsible for your side of that relationship. And I think some people, are afraid of that.
People are afraid of anything that means more responsibility for them. Isn't that an interesting concept in and of itself right there? If it's more work, if it's more pressure, if it's more obligation, if it's more anything, people are like, whoa, I don't want it. A lot of people are like that. Not being able to see the other side of that and seeing the fruits that come from taking on more pressure, obligation, and work. There's benefits too. So to simply just be afraid of taking on leverage because it's a pressure cooker, because it means more burden and more weight on your shoulders, I think it's really short-sighted.
Well, especially in relationship, I think it's something that the more responsibility you take on, oftentimes it's reciprocated, by the other person in that relationship. And that can be an economic situation too. I think the more responsibility you take on yourself, then the other person, feels more emboldened to take that. So I think it does pay off in that sense.
I've seen it over and over and over again throughout the course of my career. It always comes up. It never fails. Successful people use the word leverage as an asset, as a motivator, as a benefit. And people who aren't successful use it as an excuse. I see it all the time. It's an amazing thing. I don't know how the correlation developed between being successful and using it in a positive way and being unsuccessful and using it as an excuse. I don't know how that came to be. What was the messaging out there? What was the thing that happened in our society, in schools or in the media or whatever, right? Like, how did that come to be? Where successful people are like, yeah, give me leverage. I want to leverage relationships. I want to leverage money. I want to leverage my businesses. I want to leverage my workforce. Like, why do they get to say that? And the unsuccessful people are like, I don't want too much leverage. Don't leverage me up too much.
I wonder if it comes mainly from experience, just like that. If you're not exposed to the benefits of that and the downside of it, then you're scared of what you don't know. I feel like that.
Scared of what you don't know.
Yeah, seems to be the impression. You recently wrote, if you're in business with me, in a relationship with me, if we work together, play together, don't say no to me. What do you mean by that?
Don't say no. Like, there's always a way. We'll figure it out together. But if I bring something up with you, or if I tell you I need something, like, we need it. I need it. Like, it's what we got to do. So I'm looking for you to help me solve the problem, be part of the solution, and achieve the goal. Like, I don't want to hear no. I don't. Because I'll move on to something or someone else that's going to say yes. And then you're now down at the bottom of the list. I mean, that's the reality. There's a way. We got to find it out. Don't say no. I mean, I'm not asking you to, like, cut your leg off and, right? I mean, we're talking in a business context, in a relationship context. Don't say no. Like, the way you make things happen in life, the way you get ahead, the way you achieve is by saying yes. You got to have a say yes attitude. Man, where have I heard that before? You have to be able to deploy, yes. And with me, definitely that's the case because I can't deal with no. Like, I'm just going to move on to somewhere or someone where I feel that there's a yes waiting for me.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes people are afraid to say yes and, like that, like you just because you say yes doesn't mean you have to deliver the exact thing that is being requested. You can figure out ways of, okay, there's an obstacle and we're not able to achieve that, so let's move around and pivot and find a solution together, like you said, as opposed to, I think when people can't achieve the exact thing, they say, oh, well, no, that's just impossible.
Like, and luckily for me, I don't have a lot of no in my life, and I'm not trying to sound like, spoiled or whatever. That's not the angle I'm trying to offer here. But like with my team who I work with every single day, I'm always throwing new things at them, more stuff, extra stuff. Things come up that are outside of the purview of the regular day in and day out stuff that always happens. And I don't ever hear it, no, Peter, you don't pay me for that. Or no, Peter, it's going to mean I have to stay past 5 o'clock. Or no, like I don't hear that. And I'm very grateful for that. But I know my team and I know that I can lean on them. And they know that these things are going to come up and they produce and deliver. And it's a great thing. And this is one of the reasons why we're so successful. In personal relationships, I mean, George, if you and I were married and I kept saying, boy, I'd love to go to a Yankees game, and you kept saying no. I mean, I just think that you were just a bummer of a pain in the ass, and I'd be like, oh, this isn't working for me. You don't want to go to a Yankees game. I don't know, like dumb examples, but like so simple too, because you want to say yes. Saying yes is how it's the magic. It's the magic that makes everything happen. Personally, in business.
No, I think also people forget that the more you say yes, then if there is actually a situation where you say no, it means so much more, and it's something where it actually means we have to move in a different direction. We have to do all these things, change things, as opposed to if you're inclined to say no more often for reasons that are just I don't want to, then that means almost nothing when you say no. Then you're just as you said before, disposable.
Well, here's the combination of a lot of thoughts on this. You have to say yes as much as possible, but you have to learn when to say no. Learn when to say no. There's a right time and a right way to deliver a no. It's your job to know, K-N-O-W. Oh, I'm so good. How and when to do that. But in general, you want to be out there saying yes, man. Yes is how you're going to get ahead and achieve and satisfy the ones in your life who rely on you. Say yes, but learn when to say no. Learn when to say how and when to say no. There's a time and a place. More yes than no, and you'll be good.
So that's all the topics I got today. However, it just popped in my head, and we can cut this out if it goes nowhere. But I think 2 episodes ago, you mentioned in passing a Viking fridge. And I thought to myself, I don't know what the hell a Viking fridge is. And I wanted to ask you, you had mentioned, you're like, it's hard to get Viking fridges.
Well, it's hard to get Viking and Sub-Zero. Yeah, it's hard to get. Those are the 2 high-end appliances.
Yeah, I didn't know what that was, so I was curious.
Well, there's many. There's Gagano, there's Miele. I mean, there's lots of the European brands, but in general, in our country, very popular appliance brands are Viking and Sub-Zero. Sub-Zero makes these incredible refrigerators that everyone covets, and they last for a long, long time. They're very expensive to service because they rarely break, and when you do, you have to get someone to come over, and it's a lot of money. But they're great. They're reliable, they hold temperature, and they've evolved into this brand. It's a very expensive, high-end refrigerator, and they're very hard to get. You have to wait 16, 18 months for them right now. Same with the Viking appliances. You ever see the stainless steel stoves and cooktops with the red knobs? That's part of the Viking colorway in their brand building. So chances are that might be a Viking stove or cooktop. It takes a long time to get that stuff. I don't know if this got you where you needed to go, but
I know. Literally, I was just personally curious, and I figured I'd leave it in just in case it was useful. Cool. Well, that's what I got today, Peter. Did you want to talk about anything else?
No, I'm good. Thank you so much. See you next week.
If you like what you just heard, you can subscribe to The Daily Cash Flow on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'd love it if you left us a comment or review. You can follow us on TikTok and Twitter at SiegelCap, and on Instagram at Siegel.cap. As always, if you're an accredited investor, go to SiegelCapital.com and take our survey to see if you qualify to take part in one of our apartment building deals. That's SIEGEL capital.com.